Welcome to a quick RPG in a Box video. In this video, I want to discuss something which has been a cause of confusion for quite a while within the RPG in a Box community. And I believe I've made a discovery that I think will be beneficial to tell people about, because I think it will just bring some clarity to this much confused process within RPG in a Box. Now, if you're a complete beginner to RPG in a Box, you may or may not have yet encountered this particular issue, but you no doubt soon will. So it's worth watching, even though this is aimed at people who are very familiar with this issue. But it's good to know about because you then will never sort of run into it. But for those who are veterans of RPG in a Box, you'll be very familiar with the issue I'm about to discuss. And hopefully this video will be of use to everyone. So what's the issue that I'm talking about? So as I say, if you're a veteran of RPG in a Box, you've used it for a while, you should be very familiar with the idea that when you edit a model, whether it be a character, a tile, or a object, and you change its properties, you know, like its size, its model, its scripts, its properties, its tags, all of these sorts of things. Sometimes you have to change the model that you've placed on the map, and sometimes you don't. So in other words, Justin here, for example, I've placed on the map. If I was to go into the voxel editor and make a change to Justin, sometimes I have to actually delete this Justin and put Justin back. Other times you don't. Some things that you can change in the voxel editor get applied to everything that's placed on the map, and other times they don't. So when you go into games, sometimes your entities don't have the scripts you assigned on them because you forgot to replace the entity that was on the map. And sometimes you don't need to do that. So this can be, as I say, a point of confusion among many in the RPG in a Box community because it's not consistent, or it doesn't seem to be consistent. It seems to be a bit random. When do some things need to be updated and when do some things just automatically update for you? And I think I've just found out, the reason why certain things require you to replace the things on the map, but also how to tell when you're going to need to do that. And the clue is in the interface. So I'm going to point to you on the interface what you need to look out for to remember when you need to change things and when you don't need to change things. And I'm also going to talk about why certain things need to be updated and why certain things don't need to be updated. Okay, and there is kind of a logic behind it. There is a reason behind it. It's not random. That's not to say that it couldn't be improved over time so that you don't have to keep replacing things, but just right now, that is the way RPG in a Box is designed. But I'm going to talk about in this video how to tell when things need to be replaced before you even run into that issue when you play the game and find out the hard way. And then also why certain things are the way they are, okay? So I'm going to start with objects, but the same thing applies to tiles and characters. It's the same kind of thing. So when you go into the model editor, so let's just go to the model maker for a minute and let's open up the door model, okay? So here I am in the voxel editor, editing the model of the door that is on the map. I've placed an instance of this door on the map, and I'm opening the model in the model maker, right? When you open a model in the model maker, you have the model properties tab, okay? Now this is going to be a little bit confusing because obviously when we talk about properties, we usually think about these things, the custom properties. But in this case, I'm not talking about the custom properties. I'm talking about the properties of the model, okay? So all of these options here. So when you open the model, you have the model properties tab and you have all of these options here, okay? Now, when you go to the map editor and you click on the door, you have very similar entity properties, okay? And they have their own list of things down here, okay? And this is where some of the confusion can lie because you want to change something in the model maker and you want it to be reflected in automatically reflected in the door that's placed on the map. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you actually have to then delete this map and place the door again. Sorry, not the map. You have to delete the door and then place the door again in order for something you've changed in the model maker to be updated. So let me explain, first of all, what changes and what doesn't, and how to tell what's going to change and what doesn't. And then I'll talk through why it's designed like that. Okay. So I want to point you towards, in the model maker, a couple of properties. Tags. Notice the tags property here. This currently says door, wall, house, yeah, in there. And then we've got parsable. What else? We've got collision override, animations. We've got attach points, light source. There was something else I was going to mention as well. Perhaps it's in the characters. If you open up a character for a minute, is there anything in here that's different? Yeah, so things here like name, inventory widget, equipment widget, your equipment slot, your stats, health, magic, attack, defense, movement, all of these things I'm pointing, default equipment, all of these things I'm pointing out at the moment, okay? Attach points, okay? If we now go to the map editor and we just click on the door for a moment, notice what's missing. What's missing from the entity properties that's not in the model properties of the door. Let's just go back to the door for a minute. What are we missing? Well, we're missing tags. We can't set tags on a placed door. We can only set the tags on the model. Okay, only in the model maker can you set tags on a character, a tile, or an object. And parsable, you can only set in the model maker. It's not an option available to you on the entity you place on the map. Likewise, we can't change the stats on a character. I can't click Justin and change his health on the instance that's placed on the map. I can only do that in the model maker by opening Justin in the model maker and going to the stats section. So all the things I've just pointed out, tags, name, inventory widget, equipment widget, parsable, collision, the stats, the equipment, attach points, light source, all of those things are only unique to the model maker. They're not options available to you when you place that model on the map, and therefore the map creates an instance of that model. What happens, what does that mean when you don't have something that's available to you on the map? What it means is that when you fill these things in the model maker, so a tag, a name, a stat, an equipment, an attach point, a light source, anything that's not available to you in the map settings, those will be automatically populated across all instances of that model. So for example, if I go to Justin in the model, I'm not editing the map, I'm not clicking this Justin, I'll click off. If I go to the model for Justin and I change his name to Barry, save the model and go into the game. So here I am in the game. So there's Justin as I placed him on the map. So if I bring the console down and let me just quickly print self just to verify that it is returning Justin as the model or as the character. Now let me specifically print the name. Now, when I placed Justin on the map, his name was Justin, but in the model, I changed its name to Barry. And it comes back as Barry. I didn't need to delete Justin and place him again. It has come back as Barry. That's because I've changed a property in the model maker that is unique to the model maker. So when you change something that can only be changed in the model maker, you do not need to update it on the map. It will do that for you. Okay, that applies to things like, as I say, tags. So for example, we can go back into the model, the model maker. I can give him an additional tag. Let's say developer. And we'll go back into game again. We won't place him on the map again. Self.tags. And we have developer. Again, I didn't need to replace Justin in order for developer to be recognized as a tag in the game. it was populated to all the instances. So if I had multiple Justins placed on the map, they would all now have the tag developer. Okay. Now, this isn't just unique to the model maker. There's also settings that are unique to something on the map. For example, the most obvious one is entity ID. You cannot set an entity ID in the model maker because, for obvious reasons, models aren't unique. You could have multiple instances of the same model, so you're not going to give the model the entity ID. So it goes without saying that the entity ID is not a property that you can set in the model maker. So what that means is when you have properties that are only visible in the map and are not available in the model maker, those will only apply to the specific instance you've clicked on. In this case, this specific door will be the only thing that has either an entity ID or a tooltip or an interaction cursor. But going back to the characters for a moment, tooltips are, these are things that when you give, Justin a tooltip, only this Justin would have that tooltip. If you placed another one, this one doesn't have a tooltip, or you could give it a different one, right? So anything that you set that's only unique to the map editor will only be for that specific instance, okay? Now, I've shown you so far all the things that don't need to place the entity on the map again. Now let's go over the things that require you to replace the thing on the map again and why that is the case. So let's get rid of the tooltip. There are some things that both the model maker and the map share. So for example, if we go into the model maker, here we have a default display name. And in the map, the door also has a default display, or it has a display name, okay? So because of that, let's test this. This may work a bit differently, but let's just give it a test. If I give this door a display name, a default display name in the model maker, let's call it, I don't know, a gate. And I'm not going to place it. Now, if my theory is correct, this will not have that name. This will not have that name when we play the game. Okay, so here we are in game. So here's the door. So I'll bring the console down. We'll just quickly verify that it is the door. My cursor is over. And now let's print the name. And it doesn't have one. So I'm right. Everything is adding up to how I expect it to work, which is good. So why does the door not have the name gate? It's because both the map-placed version of the door and the model of the door share a property name, i.e. in this case, name. And so what RPG in a Box does is it doesn't automatically populate, or it doesn't automatically propagate this setting across everything that's on the map automatically, because this version, this instance of the door has its own property it's the same thing. So display name is here in the model, but it's also there on the map. So anything that basically I could go into, showing you all the other things, which I'll do in a bit, but quite plain and simply, if you want to know the answer now, when do you have to replace things? It's when you see the same setting in the map editor and in the model. Because what will happen is if you want something on the map to reflect a change you've made where they share the same property between the map and the model, you need to replace the instance on the map. Because what happens, the reason why it works this way is because they both share the same property. The engine sees them as having their own version of that property. So for example, the reason why this door that I've placed on the map has this field name is so I can override the one that's in the model maker. Okay, I can't override the tags because they can only be set in the model. I can't override the stats of the character when it's placed on the map. Obviously, you can do that in scripts by doing, character.stat speed and all, health and all of that. But in terms of editing it on the map, you don't have access to those stats. So because we don't have access to them, we don't need to update the instance that's on the map. It will reflect the change. So for example, just to prove that, if I go into the model maker, sorry, and I load Justin up and I go to his health and it's currently 20, but let's set it to 999, I shouldn't need to place Justin again. So if I print self, just to confirm it's Justin, and then we'll print self.stat HP, instead of being 20, which is what it was placed on the map as originally, I then changed the model to 999. This Justin should also be 999. And it is, right? I didn't need to replace Justin. That's because I can't change the stat when I place it on the map. So you change it via the model, and so it updates in the map. But when you have options that you can change on the map that are not unique to the map. So in other words, entity ID is only obviously relevant to that entity because you can't set it on the model. But when you have things that are shared, so thingies, for example, so if I go into the model maker and I turn Justin into a turret, which is about the only thing you can do to a character as a thingy, okay, and I save it, Justin is not a turret. I would need to replace Justin again, and now he's a turret. Then the reason being is because this instance has the same settings, but this one's off. So it doesn't, so this is overriding the setting on the model. And that's why you need to replace them, because you need to update, you need to override the one you've placed on the map to say, I do want you to override this setting because they share it, right? That applies to scripts, that applies to properties, custom properties, and that applies to thingies and anything that's shared. But anything that isn't shared, you do not need to place again. So if you add an animation to your model, you shouldn't need to place it again. I tested it. You shouldn't need to place it again. If you add attach points to your model, you shouldn't need to place it again. If you add a light source to your model, you shouldn't need to place it again. The reason being is you can't set those here on the map. I can't add an attach point. I can't change the collision here. So again, if you change the collision on the model, you shouldn't need to place it again. And I've tested all of these, by the way. I can confirm you don't need to place these again, but you never know. Just your mileage may vary. There might be a freak occurrence where for some reason it doesn't update, but it should. I've tested all of this to make sure that it is consistently how this works. So behaviors is another one where you would need to place the character again. Why? Because you could set behaviors on the character on the map, but you can also go to the model and set the behavior on the model. But if you do that, but you don't place the character again, the one on the map will not have that behavior assigned because it didn't when you placed it, if that makes sense. So anything that's shared between both the map, the instance on the map and the model, you'll need to place it again if you want it to obviously reflect that change. So for example, I'll give you a clear example of something that doesn't update. So if I go to the door, let's delete the turret. If I go to the door and I go to scripts, sorry, not the map on the door on the map. If I go to the model of the door and I add a script via the door, via the model, what have we got? Door check. Not sure. We just need something that does like a simple, perhaps I'll edit it. We just need a display message or something. So we've told this door that when we interact with it, run this script and it should display a message saying, hello, I'm a door. Okay. But we won't place the door again. Okay. We'll leave it not placed on the map. Now I could, let me just change the navigation just so it's interact. Just to give it the best chance to actually run the script, but it shouldn't. So here we go. So here's the door and it doesn't do anything. I click on it, it's not doing anything. And I don't think there's a way to print whether it has a script assigned to it or not. So let's just quit. And now if I place the door again, let's say just to the side of it, notice the script icon appears, because obviously now it knows there's a script on it, right? So this is an example of something I needed to place again, because both this door and this model have the same settings, script. But because I assigned it on the model, the one that was already placed on the map needed to be updated in order for that to be reflected. Does that make sense? So hopefully that at least gives you some clarity on how to know when you need to change things on the map and when you don't need to update things on the map, and why it is the way it is. If I go to Justin in the model maker, sorry, and I edit his default scale and I set it to free, okay, save the model. If I go to the map editor, notice how he's still small. Why is he still small? Well, if we click on him, he has his own scale, and this is overriding the free, okay? However, if I select Justin and try to place a new instance, now it's using the free because I set it on the model, right? So this is another example where I need to place it again, because both model and the instance on the map have a scale property. And so the one that's on the map will always override the one that's on the model. That's why you have to update them, because the ones that are on the map will override the ones on the model. And the reason being for that is, you obviously want to be able to have certain characters and tiles and things that have their own versions of those values. So, for example, I might want this Justin to have a different scale to a different Justin. So I scale that one up, but I want the one when I place it from the model to be free. So that's why you have these different settings, is so that you can override them. But just be mindful that because of that, the ones on the map that share those need to be updated, so that if you want them to reflect the new value, that's why you need to change it, because the one that's on the map is going to have its own stored version of that value. You need to change it, and whether that be a stored instance of Justin that doesn't have a property that you added. Again, this is why custom properties need to be, you need to replace the model, because if I select Justin, I can add a custom property to him from here, but I could also go to the model maker and add a custom property to Justin from here. But if I do it this way, if I add it on here, it won't be reflected on the instance of the model on the map, because it has its own custom properties section, which with this one is empty. So it's going to see it as empty because it's overriding the one that's currently in the model maker until you place that model again, right? And then it will use its version of this property, which is why you need to place the models again so they update, right? Hopefully this is starting to make a bit of sense. So in essence, all you really need to know to work out, so it's no longer confusing and be a bit more consistent for you when you need to delete things and place them again and when you don't, is just if there's uniquely something in the model maker that isn't to the map, you don't need to place it again. If there's things that are only available in the map settings but aren't in the model settings, then it will be for that specific instance alone, like an entity ID or a tooltip. And if there's things that are shared, like behaviors and properties and scripts and scaling and things like that, then those will be instances where you need to update what you've placed on the map, because when you first place that thing on the map, it creates an instance with its own copy of those things that are duplicated between the map and the model maker. So that's why you need to place them again, so they get updated with the changes in the model maker, so that when you place it again, it gets updated with what you've changed from when it was last placed, for the values that they share between the map and the model maker, if that makes sense. And that's, as I say, that's things like thingies, behaviors, properties, scripts. So as I say, just if you're looking at the settings in the entity and the settings in the model maker, and you see there's things they share, there's a default, if there's default equipment, for example, in the model maker, but there isn't default equipment in the map version, then you don't need to place it again when you change the equipment, because the model maker will do that. But if there's something that they share, like thingies, there's a thingies here, but there's also a thingies in the model maker, then this will be an instance where if I change this, I would need to place it again if I wanted it to be reflective of what's already on the map. Okay. So I've probably repeated myself quite a few times towards the end here, but it was really just to really sort of drill it home, what's going on here, why it works this way. Now, there is a slight exception to this, but it's just because of the quirks of RPG in a Box. The only difference to this is tiles in one specific way. So I may as well just quickly address that, just so I've covered everything. So we have a wall here, right? If I open this up in the model maker, I can do that. Come on. There we go. So if I open this up in the model maker, one of the settings that's again unique to the map to the model maker is passable. I can turn passable off and on, but I can't do that on the map. So if I place this wall, if I select it, I can't change its passability setting from the map. Okay. So you'd think, based on everything that I said so far in this video, that if I was to change it here to on, it should then change it on the map. That's not true for the passability setting. And the only reason that is it's because it's how it relates to the grid. Because you'll notice that when something is passable, let me just put the grid back. When something is passable, which this wall is at the moment, let me just check, it's passable, yeah. When I place it, it doesn't delete the lines. In fact, the lines go over the collision of the wall in this case, right? And that's virtue of it being passable. It allows the player to pass it with the navigation, right? If I delete the wall and put the navigation back and open the wall again and change its passability setting and place it again, what it then does is it deletes the navigation. That's how RPG in a Box grid mode determines whether something's passable or not. It's whether there's lines leading to it or over it or not. And all the passability setting does is either delete the lines if it's not passable, or leave them or put them over it if it is passable. Okay. Now, because it's doing quite destructive work to the navigation grid, that's why if you change that setting in the model maker, it won't change it in the map, because you then have to go in and do the navigation yourself anyway, at which point the passability setting is kind of useless anyway. I'll prove it to you. If I put the navigation back, let me just put it all back, go to the model for the wall, and I'll make sure that it isn't passable. Okay, so I shouldn't be able to walk through this door, that wall, okay, because it's not passable. So if I place this wall down, sure enough, it deletes the navigation, right? As you'd expect, it's not passable. It shouldn't allow the player to go through it. However, what I can do is I can click this floor and click this floor, right-click, navigation, walk and interact, and then I'll just do it this way. I wanted to make sure the line went under the wall rather than over it. But now, even though it's still passable, I didn't change the setting. I didn't turn it off or turn it on, whatever. I didn't change the passability setting. I just drew a line under the wall. If I go into game, so here I am in the game. So even though this wall technically isn't passable because I never changed the setting, I still can walk through it. Why? Because the lines govern collision with grid mode, not the actual collision. So the passability setting is only used when you place it. It's not used after that. So you can override the setting by just drawing the navigation lines back or deleting them if you don't want it to be passable. So really the passability setting is just a shortcut for when you place this thing, should it delete lines or not? Which is why when you change that setting in the model maker, it doesn't really have any bearing on already placed things, just purely because it's how it relates to the navigation mesh. And to be honest, the navigation mesh will override that setting anyway. So let's go to settings for a moment. This will be the last thing we do. We'll end out doing this because I think you get the idea, but just to quickly show off one last thing. If we go into the game with collision mode on, so here we are with the collision mesh on. So you can see this is the standard collision mesh of the door. So I'm not going to delete the door. I'm not going to place it again. I'm just going to go into the model and I'm going to find the collision override, give it a custom cube. In fact, no, let's not give it a custom cube. Let's give it a weird prism collision just for craziness, right? That's our new collision. And let's rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, some weird, crazy collision like that for a door. Okay, and we'll save it. Okay. And because collision is something you can only set on the model, not in the map, we shouldn't need to place it again. And here we are. See, there's our crazy prism collision on a door where I didn't need to place it again. Okay. And as I say, that applies to things like, attach points and animations as well. You shouldn't need to place the door again. It should have the new frames. It should have the new animations, have the new attach points, have light sources. I've tested all these things. They don't need to be placed again. The only things that need to be placed again, as I say, are things that can be done both in the model and the map. Okay. And that's all you need to look out for. So as I say, as long as they are unique to the model, you don't need to change. You don't need to update the instance on the map. If it's shared, then you will. Okay. Hopefully that's given you enough information to sort of find a bit more consistency with how RPG in a Box works and when you need to update things on the map and when you don't. And obviously, it might take a bit of time to get into the habit of, remembering to look out for these things, but that's how you can tell. It's there in the interface. I've pointed it out and I've explained why it works that way. So at least you don't have to struggle anymore with accidentally finding, wondering why it is that this thing isn't updating. It should be because of the reasons I've explained in this video. If there's any outlying situations where you find that something doesn't update when it should, or does update when I said it wouldn't, obviously do let me know. I believe I've tested most things to confirm it does seem to be consistently this rule. But, there might be some outlying situations like the wall, for example. But as I say, that's a very specific example because it's to do with the collision, the navigation, rather than the just standard working of an entity and its properties and settings and things like that. So, but yeah, there you go. So with that said, that'll wrap up this video. Hope it was useful and, informative to those that need it. Stay tuned for the next tutorial.